Hi, my name is Arliss, and the night I got engaged, the moment that should have been the happiest in my life, my mother stood up, called me a disgrace, and walked out, with my sister holding her purse like they'd rehearsed it. They left me standing there, alone, in front of everyone. And you know what hurt most? They didn't do it out of anger. They did it out of calculation. 2 weeks later, after they found out my father left me, part of his $720 million empire, suddenly they wanted a family reunion. Suddenly, I was worth talking to. But what they didn't know was what I was about to show up with. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you right now? Because wherever you are, you're about to hear what betrayal really sounds like. I arrived at the venue with my fiancé just as the sun was dropping behind the buildings, turning the sky a dusty shade of pink. The place was warm with soft lighting, polished floors, and the low hum of people settling into their seats. I told myself to breathe. This was supposed to be a happy night. My engagement ceremony, a fresh start. Before stepping inside, I checked my purse the way I always do: phone, keys, lipstick. Then my fingers brushed against a folded blue handkerchief I didn't remember putting there. I smiled without knowing why and tucked it back in. For a brief moment, I let myself hope that tonight might be different. I've always been the youngest in a complicated family. In our house, love was never evenly shared. My mother, Sharmika, made her preference clear early on. My older sister, Kelsey, could do no wrong. I learned to be the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't make trouble. After the divorce, that imbalance only grew sharper. Kelsey moved through life with my mother's constant approval. I learned how to stand on my own without being seen. I built a career, paid my bills, made smart choices. None of that ever seemed to count. My fiancé squeezed my hand as we walked in. "You ready?" he asked. His voice was steady. I wasn't. At first, everything went smoothly. Guests laughed, glasses clinked. Someone joked about how long we'd been together. I scanned the room until I saw her. My mother sat near the front, Kelsey right beside her. They were already whispering to each other. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on the future. This night wasn't about old baggage. Then came the toast. My fiancé stood and said the kindest things anyone had ever said about me in public. By the time he finished, my chest felt tight with gratitude. I was blinking fast, trying not to cry. That's when my mother rose from her chair. At first, I thought she was going to offer congratulations. Instead, her smile cut sharp. "Well," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the room, "I suppose it's easy to look impressive when someone else does all the heavy lifting." The room fell quiet. She turned slightly toward me. "Let's be honest, you didn't build anything on your own, and now you're marrying into comfort instead of earning it. I just hope he knows what he's getting." A low ripple of whispers spread across the tables. Someone coughed. Someone else laughed nervously. Kelsey didn't even try to hide her grin. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My mother stepped closer and pressed the blue handkerchief into my hand. "Wipe that look off your face, Arliss," she whispered. "You're embarrassing yourself." My legs felt hollow. The handkerchief slipped from my fingers and floated down to the floor near my feet. No one moved to pick it up. I stood there with the microphone still warm in my hand. The air felt thick. I could hear the dull rattle of silverware and the hum of nervous conversations starting back up again. My mother made a show of turning toward the door. "I won't support this mistake," she announced. And just like that, she walked out. Kelsey followed without looking back. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final click. Someone touched my arm, my fiancé, trying to help. I stepped away without meaning to. I couldn't trust my voice to work. In that moment, I wasn't surprised. I was wounded in a way that felt old, familiar, like a bruise someone knows exactly where to press. I walked off the stage alone. As I passed the spot where the blue handkerchief lay, I didn't stop to retrieve it. That was the night I realized something had to change, and I had no idea just how much worse things were going to get. The sun had barely pushed through the curtains when I woke up, the kind of morning light that's too gentle for the weight in your chest. I didn't move at first, just stared at the ceiling, feeling like someone had dropped a brick in my gut while I slept. My phone was buzzing somewhere near the edge of the bed. I rolled over, grabbed it, and blinked through a string of texts. Apologies, awkward sympathy. People who were at the ceremony last night trying to find the right words. Sorry your mom did that. We were so uncomfortable for you. Can't believe she said that in front of everyone. I didn't reply to any of them. A few were from people I hadn't heard from in years. It's funny how a public humiliation brings folks out of the woodwork like moths to a flame. I dropped the phone face down and closed my eyes again. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of coffee brewing and soft footsteps. David, still trying to be kind. I appreciated it, of course I did, but kindness felt like a coat I couldn't fit into right now. I wasn't cold, I was cracked. He stepped into the room with 2 mugs and sat on the edge of the bed beside me. I know you probably don't want to talk, he said quietly, but I brought you coffee. It's the good kind, the one with cinnamon you like. I sat up slowly, took the mug, and managed to thank you. The warmth helped my hands stop shaking. We didn't talk, just sat there while the silence filled the space. There's a certain flavor of quiet that only shows up the day after someone's tried to break you down in front of a room full of people. It's not peaceful, it's not even angry, it's just hollow. Later, after he left to pick up dry cleaning and give me space, I got up and started cleaning. That's what I do when I feel like I'm slipping. Scrub something, organize something, wipe down a counter like I'm wiping down my own panic. I was halfway through sorting a drawer of junk mail and old chargers when my thumb swiped the screen of my phone by accident. It opened the voicemail app. At the very top, saved and untouched, was one message, dated 4 years ago. I stared at it a second, then pressed play. Hey, Arliss, I'm not going to make it to your graduation. Kelsey's having a tough week, and she really needs me right now. You'll be fine, honey. You always are. That was it. 20 seconds. Maybe less. I remember I cried that day, alone in my apartment with the cap and gown hanging in the closet. I didn't tell anyone she didn't show. I smiled in the pictures, told friends she had a last-minute emergency. Hearing it now, though, it clicked in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't a one-time thing. It never was. That night at the ceremony wasn't some spontaneous outburst. It was the echo of every year she decided I didn't need her as much as Kelsey did. Every time I was told to understand, to be mature, to let things slide for the sake of peace. You'll be fine, honey. You always are. I sat down on the floor. I don't know how long I stayed there. My body just deflated. Eventually, I stood up and went to the window. The city was moving, people out walking dogs, heading to brunch, checking their mail. Life, marching forward like nothing cracked open last night. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. It had gone cold. I started thinking about being a kid again. How I used to sit quietly in the back seat while Kelsey cried over not getting the shoes she wanted. How I'd get a pat on the head for staying quiet. How every fight ended with Mom saying, "Arliss, you know better. Just let her have this." Even now, the pattern was intact. Don't speak. Don't demand. Don't cause waves. But something inside me had shifted. I was putting dishes into the rack when my phone buzzed again. I almost didn't check it. Thought it was another apology, another half-hearted thinking of you. It wasn't. It was a message from Uncle Curtis. "Did your mother ever mention the paperwork?" I froze. Paperwork? My hands were wet. I dried them without looking down, then typed back, "What paperwork?" He didn't answer. I waited a few minutes. Typed again. "Curtis? What paperwork?" Nothing. The message just hung there, a weight in my throat. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I stood in the kitchen, phone in one hand, towel in the other, heartbeat beginning to thud low in my ears. I'd never known Curtis to be cryptic. He was one of the few people in my family who didn't play games. If he asked something, he meant it. And that text, did she ever mention the paperwork? It wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't about the humiliation. It was about something else, something bigger, something I wasn't meant to know. That was when the pit in my stomach became something more. Not just sadness or shame, it was suspicion. I replayed the night again. The way my mother had stood up, looked straight at me, and taken control of the room like it was a stage. The way Kelsey followed her without missing a beat. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a performance. What if she wasn't just angry? What if she was afraid? I didn't have proof. I didn't have details. But for the first time, I had a question. A crack in the story I'd been told all my life. And once a crack starts, it spreads. I showered, dressed, and tied my hair back like I always do for work. Just another Monday on the surface. But under it all, something had shifted. Before leaving, I grabbed my purse. When I reached in to check for my keys, my fingers brushed against something soft. The blue handkerchief. I stared at it. I could have sworn I'd left it on the floor last night. I didn't remember picking it up. I was too stunned, too hollow. But there it was, folded, clean, waiting in my purse. I held it for a second, then folded it again, tighter this time, and slipped it back in. And that was when the first crack in the family's lies began to show. By the time I got to the office that afternoon, I'd told myself 3 separate times to just focus on work. Be present, keep my head down, let things settle. But even as I swiped my badge and stepped into the firm's glass-paneled lobby, I felt off, like I was wearing someone else's shoes, tight in all the wrong places. Colleagues greeted me with the usual nods, but there was a different charge behind their eyes, a flicker of awkwardness. "Morning, Arliss," Mark mumbled from the break room doorway, looking anywhere but directly at me. "Hey," I replied. My voice barely made it out. I reached my desk and powered up the monitor, opening up CAD files and site plans for a downtown remodel project that should have had my full attention. But my mind kept skipping, jumping from my uncle's message to the way Mom handed me that handkerchief like she was passing down some family curse. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I wasn't thinking about concrete thickness or zoning specs. I was thinking about the way people stared at me last night, the way Kelsey smirked like the whole thing had gone just as planned. I tried. I really did. I worked on notes for a layout revision and even made a few client callbacks. But I kept catching myself staring at the corner of my desk, watching dust settle like it had something to tell me. Around 3:00 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Saw this on Facebook. Thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of a comment thread under a blurry photo from the engagement party. Someone had posted the picture with the caption, "Well, that was awkward." One of the comments read, "That family's been fighting over money for years. Not surprised." I blinked at it. We'd never spoken publicly about the inheritance, not once. David and I kept it quiet, just like my father had asked. And as far as I knew, no one outside the immediate family even knew I had any share in the business, much less a substantial one. So who said that? I reread it 3 more times. The phrasing, "that family." It wasn't just gossip. It was someone familiar, someone close enough to know. I looked around the office, suddenly aware of how far from normal the day had drifted. Without thinking too hard, I minimized everything and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. A cloud drive my father once gave me access to, back when I thought being trusted with tax documents meant something. I remembered he used to upload financial backups to it before the divorce. Told me it was good practice for being responsible. I hadn't logged in since college. The folder opened. Dozens of PDFs, spreadsheets, archived documents labeled by year. I scrolled until I saw one labeled 2011 Tax Support Details. My breath caught. Line 12. Educational Support for Dependent Child, K. Keene. Amount $74,500. I stared at the date. That was the year Kelsey dropped out of undergrad. She wasn't even enrolled anymore. I remembered that clearly because I was still paying off student loans, and she was busy finding herself in California. I kept scrolling, more entries, small ones at first, then another chunk for private counselor travel expenses. K. Keene, another for housing stipend, emergency. None of them were flagged, just quietly listed like regular deductions. I sat back in my chair, stunned. I knew Dad helped her. I just didn't know it was that deep, or that hidden. But why? Why go through all that trouble to funnel money to her after she left school, after she left home, especially when he acted like he'd emotionally checked out? I felt something unravel inside me, something old. Growing up, I always thought my father's silence meant he cared less, that he, like Mom, had naturally aligned with Kelsey, and I was just background noise. But now I wasn't so sure. It didn't look like favoritism. It looked like something else, guilt, or worse, fear. I closed the file. The hum of the office felt louder now. Phones ringing, keys tapping, someone laughing 2 desks down. And then, like lightning in the middle of fog, I remembered something. I was 16. It was late. I'd gone downstairs to get a glass of water. My parents were in the living room, talking in low, angry tones. "You don't get to take credit for raising her," Mom had shouted. I heard her voice like it was yesterday. I always thought she meant Kelsey. Of course I did. She was the dramatic one, the one always running hot or cold. But now, what if she didn't mean Kelsey? What if she meant me? What if the reason Dad grew distant wasn't because he didn't care, but because he was being pushed out? I stood up. My chair rolled back with a soft creak. I needed air, but more than that, I needed answers. I walked briskly toward the lobby, grabbing my bag along the way. As I reached for my car keys inside the side pocket, I felt the soft edge of the blue handkerchief again. It was still there, neatly folded, like it had been placed there on purpose. I stared at it for a long second, then tucked it back and pushed through the glass doors into the early evening heat. The stories I'd believed about my family, about who was favored, who was forgotten, were starting to fall apart. And I was done sitting in the fog. I needed answers, real ones. I didn't drive straight to Sugarland, not at first. After leaving the office, I sat in my car with the engine idling, watching the heat shimmer over the asphalt. I needed a moment to steady myself. My hands were trembling, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of too many unanswered questions pressing at once. Finally, I pulled onto the road, letting the steady rhythm of traffic carry me southwest through familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The sky was turning that soft, burnt orange Houston gets in early evening, the kind of sunset that usually makes everything feel calm. But tonight, it only sharpened the knot in my chest. My father's neighborhood had barely changed since I was a teenager. Neatly trimmed lawns, houses that all looked slightly different, but somehow exactly the same. American flags on porches, quiet, polite, safe. Or at least it used to feel that way. As I slowed in front of his house, memories crowded in without invitation. Dad standing by the grill on Saturdays, me sitting on the curb doing homework while Kelsey scrolled on her phone. I used to believe this place was neutral ground, a place where things paused just for a while. I parked at the curb and stayed in the car longer than I meant to. I rehearsed the questions in my head about the transfer, about the voicemail, about why my engagement had felt less like a celebration and more like an ambush. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to understand. When I rang the doorbell, it felt louder than it should have. Footsteps approached slowly. The door opened only a few inches. My father stood there, framed by the dim hallway behind him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He didn't smile. "Dad," I said softly, "can I come in?" He shifted his weight, didn't open the door wider. "You shouldn't be here right now, Arliss." Something in his voice caught me off guard. Not anger, not irritation. It was restraint, like he was holding something back with both hands. "I just need a few minutes," I said. "I won't stay long." His jaw tightened. "It's not a good time." My heart stumbled. "I know it's late, but it's not about the time," he cut in, his tone sharper now. "You should go." I stared at him. Is this because I asked about the paperwork? That single word changed his expression completely. His eyes flicked past me toward the street, to the neighbor's house, to the darkened yard beside his. His voice dropped. "You shouldn't be asking questions." "Dad," I whispered, "what is happening?" For a moment, I thought he might break, might finally tell me something real. His mouth opened slightly. Then he closed the door. Not slammed, not angrily, just shut. I stood there staring at the wood grain where his face had been seconds before. I knocked again, gently at first. "Dad, please." No answer. I knocked harder. The lights inside dimmed. That was when the shock really set in. Not the kind that comes with yelling, the colder one, the kind that sinks into your bones. He wasn't just avoiding a conversation. He was avoiding me. I stepped back from the porch, my chest tight, my thoughts spinning too fast to hold on to. I hadn't driven all the way here for rejection. I'd come for truth. And the door had closed on both. I walked toward my car, the gravel crunching under my heels sounding too loud in the quiet street. Before I reached the driver's door, headlights swept across the curb. A sleek white SUV pulled up behind me. I already knew who it was before the engine shut off. Kelsey stepped out like she owned the place. Perfect hair, clean lines, designer purse slung effortlessly over her shoulder. She looked polished in a way I suddenly felt very far from. She smiled, not warmly. "Wow," she said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I didn't return the smile. "Funny. I was thinking the same thing." Her gaze flicked toward the house. "He busy?" "I wouldn't know," I said. "He wouldn't let me inside." She let out a soft laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "He's been tired lately. You really shouldn't stress him out." That landed heavier than it should have. "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Stress or control?" Her smile faded. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look," she said, "whatever you think you're uncovering, you should stop. You won't like where it leads." My arms folded instinctively. "Is that a warning?" She tilted her head. "It's concern." "For who?" She hesitated just long enough for the answer to be obvious. "Dad," she said. "He's been through enough, and frankly, you showing up with questions right now isn't helping." I felt heat rise into my face. "So it's my fault now?" "Don't make this dramatic," she sighed. "You always do that. Always." The word landed like an old bruise being pressed. She stepped past me toward the front door. "Just let it go, Arliss. You don't need to stir things up. Not again." Not again. I turned as she disappeared into the house. The door closed behind her without hesitation. The blinds shifted, then settled. The message was unmistakable. I stood alone on the curb, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. No birds, no distant traffic, just me and the echo of words meant to shut me down. I slid into my car and gripped the steering wheel tight enough for my knuckles to pale. "If they won't tell me the truth," I said aloud to the empty cabin, "I'll find it myself." As I pulled away from the house, one last glance in my rearview mirror showed nothing but a darkened porch and closed blinds. The story I'd been handed my whole life was unraveling, and I was no longer willing to play my part in it. By the time I got back to my apartment, the streets were quiet and the air felt thick with leftover heat from the day. My headlights cut through the stillness like they didn't belong. I sat in the car for a minute, not ready to go inside, not ready to be with myself. But I wasn't ready to talk to anyone either. I finally pushed open the car door and walked upstairs slowly, like the climb might somehow give me time to make sense of it all. But it didn't. Nothing made sense. Inside, the apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I just dropped my purse by the door and stood there, frozen in place. My hands still smelled faintly of the steering wheel. My back ached, my eyes burned, and the silence was loud. I walked to the couch and sat down, folding my arms around a throw pillow like it might hold me together. My breath felt shallow. I stared at nothing. Images kept flashing, Dad cracking the door just enough to shut me out. Kelsey stepping into that same doorway like it was hers now. The blinds closing in my face. And then that one sentence she'd whispered, "You won't like what you find." My chest tightened again. I didn't know if it was anxiety or heartbreak or just fatigue finally catching up with me. My whole life, I'd played the role they gave me. The polite daughter, the dependable one. The emotional cleanup crew for a family that never looked back when they walked all over me. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I never belonged in the first place. Maybe I was just tired. I pulled my knees up onto the couch and sat curled in the corner, still in the same clothes I'd worn to work. I didn't cry at first. I was past that stage, or so I thought. But it came, slow and silent. The kind of crying that doesn't make noise, just warm tears sliding down your face, steady and shameful. Like your body was grieving in secret, even if your mind refused to give in. I didn't sob, I just broke. Quietly. Completely. I whispered to myself, "I tried, Mom. I tried to be good. I tried to stay out of the way." It was all I'd ever done. Step aside so Kelsey could shine, keep the peace, smile politely, be the one who understood, who forgave, who got over it. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped seeing me at all. I don't know how long I sat like that. Eventually, I moved, not because I felt better, but because the silence felt dangerous. I needed to hear something, see something, touch anything that wasn't this invisible grief clawing at me. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the kitchen table, just something to do with my hands. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe old photos, a playlist, some distraction. Instead, I found a folder I hadn't seen in years, buried under 3 layers of subfolders, labeled Keen Legal Archive. My father had once shared it with me back when I was helping him scan documents before the divorce finalized. I'd forgotten it even existed. I stared at the folder. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. For a second, I felt like I was violating something sacred, but then I remembered the door closing in my face. The blinds. I clicked. There was a folder inside labeled Revision 2018. That year stood out. It was the same year Dad had told me, over brunch and a laminated menu, that he was rewriting some legal documents just in case. But he'd never mentioned the dealership. Inside were a handful of PDFs. My eyes scanned line after line until I hit it. My name. Arliss Keen, beneficiary designation and board appointment consideration. I stopped breathing. The document was clearly an early draft of something formal. It laid out a structure for future involvement in the Keene Auto Group. Not just a mention, my name was listed as a primary heir to 1/3 voting rights. It even included a clause about mentorship for a future leadership role. I remembered the final version he'd shown me later that year. It hadn't mentioned me once. I kept reading, and that's when the second punch landed. An email thread was attached. Between my father and, my stomach dropped, my mother. Subject line, revision concerns. Her response was smooth, clinical. Given Arliss's emotional tendencies, I don't believe board involvement is appropriate at this time. Kelsey has proven herself more aligned with public expectations and legacy representation. I suggest we revise this for family unity. Family unity. It kept coming back to that. As if I was the wedge, as if unity required my erasure. Another reply from her legal advisor included the line, "Removing Arliss quietly would be ideal. She's unlikely to push back." I read it twice, then a third time. Then my eyes blurred. They weren't reacting to anything I did. They were planning around how little they thought I'd fight. This wasn't about the engagement ceremony, or a fight in front of strangers. That was just the show. The real betrayal had happened long before, in quiet emails and locked documents. I scrolled further, another email, from Kelsey, dated 2 weeks after that draft. "We'll have to make sure she doesn't find out. She's too soft to handle real business. She'll accept whatever we tell her." I closed the laptop. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It was strategy. They'd boxed me out on purpose. And the humiliation I'd felt on stage last night, that wasn't a mother's lapse in judgment. It was an execution. I backed away from the table, my legs unsteady. I sat down on the floor, back against the cabinets, hugging my knees like I was 13 again. I didn't even realize I was whispering until I heard the words, "I don't even recognize my own family." It hit like cold water, because it was true. I'd spent my whole life trying to stay in their picture, only to learn they'd edited me out before I even got there. And for a brief, hollow moment, I thought about letting them have it all. The company, the legacy, the story they'd built without me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for it. But that thought didn't stick. Something in me, small but stubborn, refused to let go. They hadn't expected me to find the truth. And now that I had, they wouldn't see me coming. I barely slept, not really. My body lay still, but my mind stayed awake, replaying documents, words, doorways closing. When morning light crept through the blinds, it felt intrusive, like it had no right to arrive after the night I'd had. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. My phone sat untouched on the nightstand. I didn't want to see my mother's name. I didn't want to see my sisters. I didn't even want to see sympathy from strangers. I just needed quiet, but quiet wasn't going to give me the truth. I finally got up, made coffee I barely tasted, and leaned against the counter while the cup heated my hands. The apartment felt unfamiliar again, like I was renting space inside someone else's life. I kept thinking about the files, about how easily they had erased me, about how long they had been planning it. Something inside me said, softly but firmly, "You can't sit with this anymore." By late morning, I was in my car. The drive to the Northside dealership felt longer than usual. I passed landmarks I'd grown up seeing, gas stations Dad used to point out proudly, intersections where he'd lecture us about patience and timing. I used to think those talks meant something. Now I wasn't so sure. When I pulled into the lot, my chest tightened. The building hadn't changed. Wide glass windows, rows of polished cars, the company logo shining like nothing in the world could touch it. I walked inside slowly, my heels sounding louder than I expected on the tile. People glanced up. A couple of faces flickered with recognition. One man looked away too quickly. Then I saw her. Marvella Rhodes stood behind the service desk, gray streaks in her hair, posture straight, expression careful. She had worked for my father longer than I'd been alive. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Well, I'll be," she said softly. "If it isn't Mr. Keene's youngest?" I forced a small smile. "Hi, Ms. Rhodes." She hesitated, then stepped out from behind the counter. "Your father used to talk about you a lot, before things got complicated." The way she said that made my stomach shift. We moved toward a quieter corner near the coffee machine. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want witnesses. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Did my mother ever come by here?" I asked. "Over the years?" Marvella's lips pressed thin. Her eyes dropped for a second. "Yes," she said. "More than once." My heart thudded. "She'd speak on behalf of the family," Marvella continued, carefully choosing each word. "She always said you weren't interested in the business, didn't want any part of it." My hands curled into fists. "That's not true." She nodded slowly. "I know." The room felt suddenly too bright, too loud. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to press against my ears. "She made it sound very official," Marvella said, "like it came straight from you. She said it was best not to involve you, that you preferred something safer, something quieter." Safer, quieter. All those conversations from childhood rushed back to me. My mother steering me away from anything that made me stand out, telling me I was better suited for support roles. That leadership was stressful. That business was messy. All along, she had been reducing me to make herself powerful. Marvella hesitated again, then lowered her voice. "There's something else," she said, "and I don't know if I should—" My heart started racing. "Please." Her eyes flicked toward the showroom. "About a month ago, your sister came in, spoke with senior staff, said you were unstable, that you and your father were no longer on speaking terms. She warned us not to give you any access if you showed up." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "She said I was emotionally unstable?" Marvella nodded once, slowly. "Your own sister said that about you?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth slid into place with brutal clarity. My mother closed the doors. My sister locked them. I thanked Marvella quietly and walked out before my legs failed me. The heat outside wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I leaned against my car, breathing hard, trying not to unravel right there in the parking lot. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was humiliated all over again. I thought of every moment I'd defended Kelsey. Every time I'd told people, "She means well." Every excuse I'd made. They hadn't just left me behind. They had buried me. "I was never included," I whispered. "I was contained." The anger didn't explode. It settled, dense, focused, hot, not in a wild way, but in a way that burns steady and slow. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, straightened my shoulders, and got into the car. "They think I won't push back," I said to the empty seat beside me. "They're wrong." But as I drove back to my apartment, that steady defiance began to blur at the edges. Traffic crawled along I-45, while the sky shifted into that dusty Houston pink that always made me feel like time was slipping away. By the time I parked, I felt the weight of every moment since the engagement. I sat in the car for a while, engine off, windows rolled up, holding on to the silence like it might give me a second to breathe. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I did. Voicemail from Mom. I didn't hit play right away. Something about it felt off, not just the timing. The calculated silence over the past day, followed by a message the minute I visited one of Dad's dealerships. Curiosity got the better of me. I hit play. Her voice came through the speaker, even and cold. "Arlise!" You always twist things, always make everything harder than it has to be. I'm telling you this once. If you keep pushing this narrative, you're going to regret it. You're hurting the family. You're embarrassing us. Think about that before you go any further." There was a slight pause, unnatural, and then the message ended. I stared at the screen, replayed it, and again. That pause. It didn't feel like hesitation. It felt edited. There were little skips in the audio, barely noticeable unless you were listening for them. Her voice clipped too suddenly at the end of certain sentences. I knew how she spoke. I knew the cadence. This was not her raw voice. It was manufactured. Someone had taken a real recording and turned it into a trap. Make me seem unstable, unreasonable, like I was attacking her. So if the message ever came to light, it would discredit me. I pressed the phone to my chest, trying to steady the rising panic. My brain jumped ahead. Are they building something? A legal case? A statement to the press? A private letter to the board? I could barely think. I locked the apartment door behind me, threw my keys on the counter, and paced. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a strategic move. Then came the second hit. A text from Melanie, an old high school friend I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Melanie. "Hey, are you okay? Just saw Avon's post. Thought I'd check in." My hands trembled as I opened the attached screenshot. Avon had posted a long, public message to her social feed. Vague, but pointed. Families go through things. Some wounds never heal. When someone lashes out, spreading painful lies, you can't always fix it. You just pray for their peace and protect your own. I'm doing what's best for Mom. Please respect that. The comments were worse. "So sorry, Avon. You're doing the right thing. Some people are just toxic, no matter how much you love them. Family over drama, always." And she was liking all of them. Every last one. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch, phone still in hand. The humiliation hit like a wave of heat. That itchy, shameful burn that crawls up your neck and makes you want to disappear. She had painted me out as the unhinged one, the attention seeker, the unstable daughter lashing out. All before I'd said a word, the walls felt like they were closing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was hear my sister's voice in my head, rehearsing that post, knowing exactly how to make it sound sincere, playing the victim while burying the knife. But then, something shifted. As fast as the panic rose, it froze. They're preparing the story, setting the narrative, getting ahead of me. And suddenly, I didn't want comfort. I wanted data. I pulled out my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and connected my phone. I needed to extract the voicemail file. I needed to know if it had been doctored. I remembered someone from college, Kyle, from the computer science department. He owed me a favor. 10 minutes later, I'd emailed the file to him with a simple message. "Can you check this for edits or metadata manipulation? Don't need details, just facts." I didn't care how it made me look. I wasn't unraveling, I was documenting. While I waited, I started pulling everything I had. Screenshots of texts, emails from old family threads, calendar appointments that contradicted their stories. Every scrap that told the real version, not the one they wanted the world to believe. 2 hours later, my phone rang. "Kyle," I answered, not even waiting for a hello. "Yeah," he said, tone serious. "So, you were right. That voicemail wasn't recorded straight. It was edited. Looks like splices from at least 2 different recordings. It was stitched together, badly. Whoever did it also tried to scrub the metadata." My stomach flipped. "But they missed something," he added. "The original editing device? Its internal name was AKO iPad Pro. I don't know what that means to you, but it was there, plain as day. AK Avon Keene." I closed my eyes. "Thanks, Kyle," I said. You didn't see this. You never touched this. He understood. Good luck, Arliss. I hung up and sat still for a long time. The pieces were all there. My mother was the voice, but my sister was the architect. They weren't reacting to anything I'd done. They were preemptively building their case. Because if I took my rightful seat at the table, if I accessed my inheritance, my shares, my voice, everything they'd curated would unravel. And now they were moving fast. I wasn't in a family war. I was being targeted in a reputational one. I opened a new document, titled it Evidence Phase 1. Then I began organizing everything. One folder for edited content, one for digital timestamps, one for public smears, one for legal inconsistencies. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I was done begging for clarity. I was done being gaslit by the people who called me family. I looked at the quiet kitchen around me, the hum of the fridge, the untouched coffee mug from that morning still sitting in the sink. They think I'm weak, I whispered, still the girl who wouldn't push back. But even I could hear it. My voice had changed. It was colder now, steadier. This wasn't survival anymore. This was preparation. The next morning came with no calls, no texts. Just a manila envelope slid halfway under my apartment door. No return address, just my name in stiff typed lettering. Inside was a formal request for a family discussion, signed by my mother's attorney. The wording danced around the idea of reconciliation, but every phrase was calculated. Preserve family unity. Resolve confusion surrounding assets. Prevent further misunderstanding. They wanted me to show up, play nice, and nod while they twisted the truth into something convenient. But I wasn't coming as the girl they used to corner. By late afternoon, I had spread every piece of evidence across my dining table. I printed out access logs, metadata screenshots, versions of the inheritance paperwork, one with my name, one without. I highlighted timestamps. I reviewed the analysis file from Kyle one more time. I didn't rush, I didn't shake. I chose a navy pantsuit with clean lines and a high collar. No jewelry, no softness. My hair tied back, not because I wanted to impress, but because I was stepping into a room where posture mattered more than sentiment. At 6:12 p.m., I pulled into the lot of an old money country club tucked into the edge of Memorial, the kind of place where men still called waiters "son" and women whispered through clenched teeth. The staff at the front gave me a once-over, then nodded. Private room B. They're already inside. Of course they were. I paused just outside the door. My heartbeat wasn't erratic. It was a steady thud, like distant drums. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The room smelled like leather polish and old decisions. Long table, crystal glasses, too much silence. At the far end, my mother sat upright, her pearls in place, not a hair out of line. Avon lounged sideways, arms crossed, trying too hard to look uninterested. The man to their left was a lawyer I didn't recognize, but he stood as I entered. "Ms. Keene," he said, "thank you for agreeing to this." I didn't shake his hand. I didn't sit. I didn't agree. I came to listen. Avon gave a soft laugh, like she'd already won. The attorney adjusted his cuffs and launched into a polished monologue. They'd reviewed some confusing documents. The inheritance file I found was an outdated draft, likely uploaded by mistake. My father, bless his heart, had been ill for some time. Miscommunications, clerical errors. It happens. And as for my accusations of manipulation, he called them deeply concerning and potentially damaging to all parties involved. That's when my mother finally spoke. "You've always had a flair for drama, Arliss," she said, her voice dripping in gentility. "But this has gone far enough. We're here because we care. About you. About the family." I let them talk. Every lie slid across the table like wine on polished wood. Controlled, rehearsed. Then I placed my folder down. "I have logs," said, my voice calm. "Access logs showing the original file with my name listed. Logs showing when it was removed, who removed it, from which account." I slid the papers forward. The lawyer leaned in. My mother didn't move. Evan's smirk faded. "The account," I said softly, "was tied to your email address, Mom, and your device ID, Avon." Silence. The lawyer cleared his throat, reaching for the papers. I continued. "I also have the forensic report on the voicemail you sent me, the one meant to make me look unstable. It was edited, stitched together from multiple recordings. The metadata shows it was processed through Aka iPad Pro. Sound familiar?" Avon flinched. My mother turned her head toward her. "Avon?" Avon's face twisted, but she couldn't speak. So I did. "You posted lies. You manipulated recordings. You rewrote my place in this family, thinking I'd stay silent, like always. But you underestimated one thing." My hands didn't shake. "You thought you were dealing with the girl you left behind at the engagement party. You were wrong." I reached into my bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the table. "To your attorney. It contains every piece of documentation I've compiled. Edits, timestamps, a chain of custody. The beginnings of what will become an official complaint if I see another false post, if I receive another manipulated message, or if you attempt to block access to my legal rights again." The lawyer didn't touch it, but my mother did. She looked at the seal, then up at me. This time, her voice wasn't sharp. It was small. "Arliss, we can talk. Just the three of us. No lawyers, no threats. We're family." I stood. "I gave you that chance. This is me choosing clarity." Avon slammed her hands on the table. "You think you're some hero now? You think anyone's going to believe your little revenge tour? You don't know what you're doing." I looked at her. Finally really looked at her. The panic, the loss of control. She wasn't attacking anymore. She was unraveling. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm cleaning up the mess you two built on secrets." I walked to the door. My mother called my name. I didn't turn around. Outside, the sun had fully dropped. The sky held that hazy warmth only Texas nights could manage, where the air itself buzzed like a held breath. I stood by my car, inhaling slowly. My palms tingled, not from fear, but from something else. Relief, maybe. Or release. For the first time in my life, I hadn't backed down. I had spoken the truth, and I'd done it without apology. And then I went quiet. 2 full days passed, and I didn't post a thing. I didn't respond to the texts I knew were waiting. I didn't tell anyone how the meeting ended. I didn't defend myself, didn't explain. Instead, I walked. I walked the quiet streets of my neighborhood in the early mornings, when the air still held that soft chill before the Texas sun baked it out. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I let the world unfold without me for a while. My breathing slowed. My coffee tasted like coffee again, not like a warning. I didn't disappear, I just stopped performing. And it was strange how my silence did more damage than their noise ever could. By the 3rd day, it started leaking out. Bits and pieces of the meeting that no one expected to surface. A friend texted me a video clip someone anonymously uploaded, muffled audio from a server outside the country club room. My sister's voice, angry and loud, shouting accusations I never even responded to. Then someone shared the analysis report. Not the full file, but enough. Clipped voicemail segments, device ID traces, an email address tied back to Avon. Again, not from me. Someone had posted it from a throwaway account. I didn't ask who. And just like that, the tide turned. Messages started trickling in from old classmates, distant relatives, people who'd once sided blindly with my mother. Some were vague apologies, some were awkward acknowledgments. Others just said, "I see you now." I didn't answer them either. Late that night, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. But then, just before midnight, it rang again. This time, I picked up. "Arliss!" The voice was unmistakable, slower now, older, my father. He didn't speak like a man in power. He spoke like someone searching for footing. "I'd like to see you, alone, no lawyers, no agenda." There was a pause. "If you're willing." I didn't say yes right away. I told him I'd think about it. Then I stayed up staring at the ceiling for another hour. The next afternoon, we met at a roadside diner about 40 minutes outside the city. No valet, no linen napkins. Just cracked vinyl booths and the smell of fried okra. We sat in a corner near the jukebox that hadn't worked in years. He looked smaller than I remembered, grayer, slower, but his eyes were clear. "I should have called you sooner," he said, wrapping both hands around a chipped coffee mug. "I just didn't know what to say. That wouldn't sound like an excuse." I waited. He sighed. "Your mother, she didn't want you on the inheritance documents when we divorced. Said if I didn't remove your name, she'd go public. Accused me of hiding assets, abusing trust, whatever she could make stick. I told myself I was protecting you by going along with it." His fingers trembled slightly as he spoke. "I didn't think it would matter long term. I thought you'd come into the business naturally, eventually. But she made sure you didn't. Every year, it got harder to fix what I should have fought for in the first place." I swallowed hard, not out of anger, but from the ache of hearing what I'd always suspected. "I wasn't trying to choose sides, Arliss. I was trying not to drown." He looked down at the table, then back up at me. "You don't owe me forgiveness," he said quietly, "but you deserve to know the truth." I nodded, not in surrender, not in closure, just acknowledgement. When we stood to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a folded paper. "I've been working on something, not just money, something for your name." I didn't open it until I got back to my car. It was a draft of a scholarship program for women entering the automotive business under my name, funded by our company. He hadn't asked my permission, he just built it, quietly. I took a long breath. That evening, I sat in my apartment with every file I'd collected over the last week. Everything from the voicemail edits to the document manipulations to the social media fabrications. I laid them out like puzzle pieces on my kitchen table, and I realized I had enough to destroy them. Legally, socially, financially, all of it. But I also realized I didn't want to. Not because they deserved mercy, they didn't, but because I deserved peace more than they deserved punishment. So, the next morning, I met with my attorney. We filed a claim to reinstate my inheritance rights and added protections to ensure no one could interfere again. No defamation suits, no public statements, just boundaries, legal and emotional. There would be no reunion, no apology letters, no lunches where we pretended the past hadn't happened. Just space, and safety, and silence. 2 weeks later, I stood outside my father's flagship dealership. Crews were installing a new plaque under the corporate sign. Keen Automotive Leadership Initiative. I watched them bolt it in place. He'd asked me to design it, to structure the scholarship, to define the mentorships, to guide the mission. And for the first time, I said yes to something not out of obligation, but out of ownership. As the last bolt tightened, I felt a memory stir. A little girl once told she wasn't cut out for big things. That she was too sensitive, too soft, too much. And in that moment, it felt like she whispered back, "You finally saw me." My mother taught me silence. My sister taught me competition. But life taught me something louder, that the moment you stop chasing a place in the wrong family, you start building your own. I stepped into the sunlight, unafraid.